Welcome to Holly's Quiet Harbor. Take a deep breath and let your mind begin to rest. Every evening in the hidden valley ended in much the same way. Just before the sun slipped behind the western hills, and just before the first stars appeared overhead, the keeper set aside whatever work remained and took a quiet walk through the valley. It wasn't because anyone expected trouble. Trouble was a rare visitor here. The keeper simply believed that every creature deserved to be wished good night. It had become a tradition so old that no one remembered when it had begun. The rabbits expected it. The cloud sheep waited for it. Even the lavender dragons, who often forgot where they had left their favorite sleeping caves, somehow always remembered when it was time for the keeper's evening walk. Tonight was no different. The little stone cottage glowed warmly beneath the branches of the great oak. Its windows reflected the last golden light of the day, while smoke curled lazily from the chimney and disappeared into the evening sky. The keeper stepped outside, closing the wooden door with quiet care. The valley greeted them with familiar sounds. Water trickled over smooth stones in the nearby stream. Crickets had begun their nightly chorus. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine, lavender, and wild thyme across the meadow. The keeper paused for a moment, taking one slow breath. "Good evening," they whispered to the valley. The walk had begun. The blackberry hedges were always the first stop. Sure enough, a dozen silver rabbits were already gathered there. The tiniest among them stood on its hind legs, ears twitching hopefully. "I thought I might find you here," the keeper said with a smile. From one pocket came a handful of sweet clover blossoms. The rabbits accepted them politely, each waiting its turn before nibbling its evening treat. One particularly fluffy rabbit stretched as high as it could reach, trying to peek into the keeper's pocket. "You've already had 2 blossoms." The rabbit blinked innocently. "So you say." The keeper laughed softly. "I believe your whiskers tell a different story." Leaving the rabbits happily munching their supper, the keeper continued toward the rolling hills, where the cloud sheep spent their evenings. Cloud sheep looked very much like ordinary sheep from a distance. Up close, however, their wool shimmered like morning mist. When they lay together in the meadow, they resembled little drifting clouds that had decided the earth was a pleasant place to rest. There were 12 of them. The keeper counted quietly. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. "Excellent," the keeper said. "I don't believe anyone has wandered onto the cottage roof today." Several sheep looked suspiciously at the ground. The keeper smiled. "I'll take that as progress." A tiny lamb wandered over, carrying a daisy in its mouth. "Oh," said the keeper. "For me?" The lamb nodded enthusiastically. The keeper accepted the flower with great seriousness. "It is beautiful. Thank you." the lamb seemed very pleased indeed. The path wound gently upward from the meadow until it reached a quiet hillside warmed by smooth stones that had spent all day gathering sunlight. Here lived the lavender dragons. They were no larger than foxes, with rounded wings and shimmering scales in soft shades of violet and blue. Most people imagined dragons breathing fire. Lavender dragons preferred warm, lavender-scented mist. Whenever they sighed, the whole hillside smelled as though someone had opened the windows of a peaceful cottage, filled with drying herbs. 3 young dragons lay curled together, already half asleep. A 4th yawned so deeply that a little cloud of fragrant purple mist floated into the evening air. The keeper tucked a blanket over the smallest dragon. "There now," they whispered. "Sleep well." The dragon made a tiny humming sound without opening its eyes. Satisfied that everyone was comfortable, the keeper continued on. The sun had nearly disappeared now. The valley was changing. Golden light slowly became silver. The first stars awakened overhead. Fireflies drifted through the tall grass like tiny lanterns. This was the keeper's favorite part of every day. The moment when daytime creatures settled into quietness and the moon creatures began to stir. A narrow path curved through a grove of silver birch trees. Beyond them lay the northern meadow, home of the moon unicorns. The meadow itself seemed to glow beneath the rising moon. White moonflowers had opened across the hillsides, their petals shining softly in the evening light. Silver grasses swayed gently in the breeze. The keeper smiled. Soon they would hear the familiar sound of young hooves racing happily across the meadow. It happened every evening. The foals always came running. The first appeared almost immediately. A spirited little colt bounded through the moonflowers. Then came 2 sisters, always walking shoulder to shoulder. Another young unicorn trotted gracefully behind them. 2 more emerged from the tall grass near the stream. The keeper smiled. "Good evening, little ones." The 6 foals gathered happily around them. One nuzzled the keeper's hand. Another proudly showed off a tiny white feather it had discovered earlier that day. The keeper laughed softly, admiring the treasure with great enthusiasm. Then, almost without thinking, the keeper looked toward the far side of the meadow. A small crease appeared between their brows. They counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The smile faded ever so slightly. Every evening, there were 7. The keeper looked toward the herd. The adult unicorns had noticed it too. The eldest mare, Celine, was already watching the edge of the forest. Her ears were lifted, not frightened, listening. The keeper walked quietly to her side. "Luma?" they asked gently. Celine lowered her head. Then, without a sound, she turned and looked toward the ancient woods beyond the meadow. The keeper followed her gaze. The forest stood peaceful beneath the rising moon. Still, beautiful, silent. After a thoughtful moment, The keeper smiled, not with worry, but with quiet understanding. "Our little explorer," they murmured. Just then, footsteps approached along the birch path behind them. You had arrived, hoping to join the keeper's evening walk as you often did. The keeper turned, relief warming their face. "I'm glad you're here," they said softly. Then they looked once more toward the moonlit forest. "It seems," they said, "that one very curious unicorn has decided tonight would be a wonderful evening for an adventure." The keeper picked up the lantern hanging from the meadow gate. Its soft silver light spilled onto the path leading into the trees. They smiled at you. "Would you care to help me bring little Luma home before she misses her bedtime?" Together, you stepped beneath the ancient branches, where the moonlight danced between the leaves, and the hidden valley held its breath, waiting to see where curiosity had carried its smallest unicorn. The forest welcomed them with cool, silvery shadows. Moonlight filtered through the branches in long ribbons, painting soft patterns across the mossy ground. The air smelled of cedar, damp earth, and the sweet fragrance of night-blooming jasmine that climbed quietly around the older trees. The keeper held the lantern low. Its gentle silver light seemed almost alive, illuminating the path without disturbing the peaceful darkness beyond. For a while, neither of you spoke. The hidden valley always seemed to grow quieter after sunset, but it was never an empty silence. It was filled with small sounds. The distant trickle of water over stones, the gentle rustle of leaves high overhead, the sleepy chirp of crickets hidden beneath ferns. Somewhere far away, a frog sang a cheerful note before settling once more into stillness. You looked down at the path. Tiny hoofprints shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "They're so small," you whispered. The keeper smiled. "Moon unicorn foals leave silver traces for a little while after they walked beneath the evening sky." You knelt for a closer look. Sure enough, each tiny hoofprint held the faintest sparkle, as though a star had briefly rested there before continuing on its journey. "They're fresh," said the keeper. "Luma came this way." Together, you followed the little trail deeper into the woods. Every so often, the hoofprints paused. Here, she had stopped beside a cluster of glowing mushrooms. There, she had wandered in a careful circle around a fallen log covered with emerald moss. Farther along, she had apparently stood beneath a tree whose branches were filled with tiny, sleeping birds. The keeper chuckled. She likes to investigate everything. "You don't seem worried." "Oh, I'm a little concerned." The keeper stepped carefully around a bed of moon violets. But concern and panic are very different companions. You thought about that for a moment. It seemed like something worth remembering. The path curved gently around a stream. The water reflected the moon so perfectly that it looked as though another sky flowed quietly between its banks. Across the stream stood a curious little building unlike any you had seen before. Its walls were made from warm, honey-colored wood. The roof curved gently, like folded wings. Round windows glowed with amber light. Dozens of tiny birdhouses hung from nearby branches, each carved differently. One resembled an acorn. Another looked like a teapot. One had been built inside what appeared to be an enormous pine cone. "What is this place?" you whisper. "The Owl Library," said the keeper. "You have a library for owls?" The keeper smiled. "For everyone." Before you could ask another question, the wooden door opened. An elderly owl blinked sleepily from behind tiny round spectacles, balanced near the end of his beak. He wore an impossibly small knitted scarf, despite the pleasant evening. "Keeper?" he said warmly. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "We're looking for little Luma." The owl's golden eyes brightened with recognition. "The curious one?" "The very same." "Oh, yes." The owl nodded slowly. "She visited not long ago." "Did she?" "Indeed." He disappeared briefly inside the library. You hear the gentle sound of books being moved. A moment later, he returned carrying a large, leather-bound volume. He carefully opened it upon a little wooden stand. "We've been reading." The keeper smiled knowingly. What was tonight's selection? "The Astonishing Adventures of the Butterfly Queen." The owl adjusted his spectacles. "Luma was completely captivated." You smiled. "I imagine she would be." "Oh, yes." The owl turned another page. "She asked no fewer than 14 questions." "What sort of questions?" asked the keeper. The owl cleared his throat importantly. "Why do butterflies always seem to know where flowers are? Do butterflies ever become tired? Can butterflies see the moon? If I walked very quietly, would butterflies think I was a flower?" The keeper laughed, a warm, gentle laugh that seemed perfectly at home among the trees. "That certainly sounds like Luma." The owl nodded. "When she left, she mentioned wanting to find the oldest butterflies in the valley." He closed the book with quiet satisfaction. "I suggested she might ask the fireflies." "The fireflies?" you asked. "They're excellent observers," the owl replied. "They notice almost everything." The keeper thanked him. Before you continued your journey, the owl reached beneath the counter and produced a tiny paper parcel tied with green string. "For the road." Inside were warm honey biscuits no larger than coins. "The mice baked them this afternoon." The keeper accepted one with gratitude. You each enjoyed a biscuit beneath the library porch. It tasted of honey, cinnamon, and something wonderfully comforting that reminded you of home. As you prepared to leave, the owl raised one feathery wing. "Oh," the keeper paused. "There was one other thing." "Yes?" The owl thought carefully. "When Luma crossed the bridge—" "The bridge?" "She wasn't alone." You exchanged a glance with the keeper. "Who was with her?" The owl smiled. "A butterfly." He chuckled softly to himself. I do believe the butterfly thought it was leading Luma." The keeper laughed again. "I'm not entirely convinced it wasn't." The owl watched as the two of you continued along the winding forest path. The silver hoofprints appeared again almost immediately beyond the bridge. This time, they were joined by something else. Tiny shimmering wings had left a faint trail of golden dust dancing across the moss. The keeper knelt beside them. "Well," they said softly, "it seems our little explorer has made a friend." The lantern cast its gentle glow ahead, revealing a narrow path you hadn't noticed before. It wound through a grove of flowering trees whose branches sparkled with sleeping butterflies folded quietly beneath their leaves. The keeper looked toward the hidden path. "I believe," they said with a smile, "we're getting closer." And somewhere, carried on the night breeze, there came the faintest sound. Not frightened, not lonely, but unmistakable. A tiny, joyful laugh. The keeper stopped walking. "So," they whispered with a smile, "she isn't frightened after all." You listened carefully. The little laugh came again, drifting softly through the trees before disappearing into the evening breeze. It was followed by another sound. Not words, not quite a song, more like the delicate flutter of hundreds of tiny wings. The narrow path wound between flowering trees whose branches arched overhead like a welcoming doorway. Beyond them, the forest slowly opened. You found yourself standing at the edge of the most beautiful orchard you'd ever seen. Ancient apple trees stretched across a gently rolling hillside, their trunks twisted gracefully with age, while their branches spread wide beneath the moonlight. Silver apples hung among the leaves, each glowing with the softest pearly light. The grass beneath the trees shimmered with dew. Butterflies floated lazily through the orchard. Not just one or two, hundreds of them. Some were pale blue. Others glowed softly in shades of gold, lavender, rose, and moon white. Instead of sleeping, they drifted peacefully from blossom to blossom, as though moonlight itself had given them wings. The keeper smiled knowingly. The Moon Butterfly Orchard. You looked around in amazement. "I've never seen this place before." Very few have. The keeper's voice remained little more than a whisper. The butterflies prefer quiet visitors. As though agreeing, dozens of butterflies settled gently upon the nearby flowers. The orchard seemed wrapped in a peaceful stillness, unlike anywhere else in the valley. No creature hurried. Even the breeze moved slowly here. The keeper pointed toward the oldest apple tree at the center of the orchard. There. At first, you couldn't see anything. Then, one butterfly lifted into the air, and another. Slowly, a small white shape appeared beneath their delicate wings. Curled comfortably against the broad roots of the ancient tree fast asleep, was Luma. The little unicorn foal lay with her nose tucked beneath one snowy foreleg. A few silver apples rested nearby. One butterfly had settled gently upon her ear. Another rested between her tiny shoulders. Several more floated lazily above her like living moonlight. She looked perfectly content. The keeper chuckled so softly that it was almost carried away by the wind. "I thought we might find you dreaming." Luma's ears twitched. One eye opened sleepily, then the other. For a long moment, she simply blinked at the keeper, as though surprised to discover anyone else awake. Then she yawned. It was a very impressive yawn for such a small unicorn. She stretched each front leg, then each back leg. Finally she stood, gave herself a gentle shake, and wandered happily toward the keeper, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. The keeper knelt beside her. "You've given everyone quite an adventure this evening." Luma lowered her head ever so slightly, not quite ashamed or proud, just thoughtful. The keeper gently brushed a leaf from her mane. "Were the butterflies worth the journey?" Luma nodded enthusiastically. "I suspected they might be." The keeper reached into the satchel and offered her a slice of dried apple. She accepted it gratefully. Then, quite unexpectedly, she stepped over to you. Very gently, she rested her forehead against your shoulder. You stood perfectly still. Her coat felt warm, despite the cool evening air. Soft, almost impossibly soft. For a few quiet moments, neither of you move. The keeper smiled. "I believe she's thanking you." You smile back. "It was a wonderful adventure." Luma lifted her head. A tiny butterfly landed briefly upon the tip of her horn, before fluttering back into the orchard. The keeper looked toward the ancient apple tree. "Shall we head home?" Luma took a few steps, then stopped. She looked back toward the butterflies dancing beneath the branches. The keeper understood immediately. "You may visit again." The little unicorn brightened. "But next time," the keeper paused with a playful smile, "perhaps let someone know where you're going." Luma gave the tiniest nod. Whether she was promising or merely hoping, no one could quite tell. The journey home felt even quieter than the journey out. The butterflies gradually disappeared behind the trees. The orchard faded into silver moonlight. The forest welcomed them once again with gentle shadows and the fragrance of pine. As they crossed the little bridge near the owl library, the elderly owl looked up from his book. "Found her, then?" "We did." "Reading?" "No." "Butterflies?" The owl nodded thoughtfully. "Entirely understandable." He returned to his book with a satisfied smile. Farther along, the lavender dragons slept soundly beneath their blankets. One tiny dragon sighed contentedly, releasing a soft puff of lavender-scented mist that drifted lazily across the hillside. The cloud sheep had already gathered into one enormous fluffy circle, each one leaning gently against another. The rabbits were asleep beneath the blackberry hedges. Only the stars remained fully awake. When the moon unicorn meadow finally came into view, the waiting herd quietly lifted their heads. Celine stepped forward. Luma trotted happily to her side. The older mare touched her nose gently against the little foal's forehead. No scolding, no fuss, only relief. The other foals gathered around, eager to hear about butterflies and glowing apples and secret orchards. Luma's eyes sparkled. It seemed she had quite a story to tell. The keeper watched for a moment before quietly turning away. You followed. "Will she wander again?" you asked. The keeper laughed softly. "Oh, almost certainly." "Doesn't that worry you?" The keeper thought for a moment before answering. "Curious hearts sometimes wander." They looked up at the stars. "Our task isn't to keep them from exploring. It's simply to make sure they always know the way home." The two of you walked the final stretch in comfortable silence. Soon the warm lights of the little stone cottage appeared beneath the great oak. The valley had settled completely into night. Every creature was home. Every lantern glowed softly. Every breeze carried the scent of lavender and pine. The keeper opened the cottage door and looked back across the peaceful valley one last time. "Sleep well, little ones," they whispered. Far away in the northern meadow, one tiny unicorn lifted her head just long enough to look toward the cottage. Then she curled beside her family beneath the silver moon. The keeper smiled. Another gentle evening had come to its quiet end. And somewhere, beyond the cottage windows, butterflies continued their slow moonlit dance through the ancient orchard, waiting patiently for the next curious heart to discover them.